This program is brought to you by cable franchise fees and generous donations from viewers like you.
So seeing the presence of a quorum, I'm calling to order this meeting of the Amherst School Committee at 6:31 p.m. And we will start with a roll call attendance. Mr. Demling.
Demling present.
Mr. Harrington.
Harrington present.
Ms. Lord.
Lord present.
Ms. Spitzer.
Spitzer present.
And McDonald present. So we're in order. And I'll turn it over to Chair Hall.
All right, thanks. Seeing a presence of a quorum, I'll call to order this meeting of the Pelham School Committee at 6:31. And I'll start with roll call attendance. Ms. Kenny.
Kenny present.
Ms. Barlow.
Barlow present.
Ms. Stancer.
Stancer present.
Mr. Menino.
Menino present.
And Hall present.
Okay. And now I'll call to order the meeting of the Regional School Committee at 6:32 p.m. And we'll start with roll call. Mr. Demling.
Demling present.
Mr. Harrington.
Harrington present.
Ms. Kenny.
Kenny present.
Ms. Lord.
Lord present.
Ms. Seeger.
Seeger present.
Ms. Spitzer.
Spitzer present.
Ms. Spencer.
Stancer present.
Mr. Sullivan.
Sullivan present.
And McDonald present. So we are now in order. And I will note that we are being recorded and live streamed on Amherst Media's website, as well as on Channel 15 in Amherst. And thank you, as always, to Amherst Media for your support in that. And our first item is public comment, and we have some voice comment and some written comment. And I will start with the voice.
This is Tony Cunningham of Amherst. I'm calling to commend the teachers at Wildwood and acknowledge their extraordinary efforts to make remote learning as good as it can be. Laurie Hurd and Kristen Riley in 2nd grade and Chris Owen in 5th grade have strived to create content to keep the children engaged in what is a very challenging set of circumstances for everyone. All of the special teachers too, librarian Susan Wells, art teacher Carrie Ann, the two Catherines for music and technology, and Keith Burgoyne for PE have all gone above and beyond to reach the kids through the screens and build human connections and facilitate learning. The wonderful book distribution project that Susan Wells developed and implemented has received some worthy press, but I wanted to share that I see all of the teachers that my children have contact with working very hard to make this work. I look forward to the time when we can all be vaccinated against this scourge and the children can be back in the classroom with their friends again. Hi, my name is Sheila Jones, and I am a parent in Amherst. I have a high schooler and a senior at the high school, and I have a 6th grader at Wildwood. And I would just like to emphasize how much we appreciate everything that the teachers are doing right now in these crazy, challenging times. Just so much resourcefulness, so much creativity, working so hard to keep the student communities together and connected to families. We're so impressed with all their hard work. And I think that's important to acknowledge. Thanks.
I'm now going to share the written comment, which, if it's not posted already, will be posted on the agendas webpage for the Regional School Committee on arps.org. Are folks able to see this? As mentioned, that document will be made available on the agendas webpage for the Regional School Committee on arps.org. Our next item is to approve minutes, and we had a few minutes in our packet, or a few sets of minutes within our packet.
Ms. McDonald, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we're caught up on joint minutes. I think the minutes that are in the packet are region only, and there's a place on the agenda for them later.
Okay.
I think we're good for this group, and we'll get to the regional minutes on the regional side.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. I was just thumbing through and couldn't find them in the packet, so now I know why. Great. So we will move on then to the superintendent's update. And so I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Morris.
Sure. We meet regularly, but there's never a shortage of things. So I apologize about the length of the update. So first thing, I just want to thank Sheila and Tony for those public comments. I think they're spot on in terms of the incredible work that people are doing. I think for a lot of families, even if they had other people helping, the snowstorm in the last 2 days has for families who weren't actively seeing what their kids were doing, people have gotten that window, and I got a lot of communication from families with that appreciation for the hard work of our staff in the last 48 hours. So thank you for that public comment, and absolutely agree with that sentiment. As the people on the committee know, on the 26th of last month, just about every superintendent in Hampshire, Hampden, and Franklin counties wrote a letter advocating for an earlier inclusion of educators in the vaccine timeline. We received a response yesterday, which was shared with the committee from the Secretary of Education, which disagreed with the opinions expressed by the superintendents out here. The North Shore superintendent sent a similar letter. And I think I'll just voice that this may be something that the committee may wants to come back to, maybe as soon as, we'll see. I know next week we have a meeting posted. Maybe we can add to that because we're well beyond the 48-hour timeline. We can talk about the upcoming topics, but it's 2021, so we all know and see pictures of educators in New York and Connecticut getting vaccinated. And so when I hear in Massachusetts saying it can't be done, we know that that's factually inaccurate, that other states have figured out other mechanisms to have their educators vaccinated sooner than we have in Massachusetts. So I was a bit frustrated, candidly, with the response that we received from the Secretary of Education of the Commonwealth. And while I agree with some sentiments that I think we can, with safeguards, we can produce an environment in school that I feel comfortable with, that's not to preclude the fact that we want our educators to get vaccinated and feel and be as comfortable as they can be when they're in school with children. So, I'll leave that for maybe upcoming agenda topics, but for the committee, you saw both the email of the superintendent's group as well as the response. And I want to thank the APA for joining me, and they're certainly advocating along similar lines around where educators fall in the vaccination timeline. And I know that's a dicey political question, but when I see our two of our neighboring states seemingly doing this, I don't understand what's different in Massachusetts, except we're 46th in this country in terms of vaccines percentage of vaccines received that have gone in arms. And I can't help that there's a relationship between that data point and then the data point about where educators fall in the timeline. So I'll soapbox when it's an agenda topic, more formally in superintendent update, but I just want to express my frustration. I just more shared those letters with the committee without commentary, but I did think commentary is needed here. On a much more positive note, I want to congratulate Alicia Lopez. I think as many of you know, she was a finalist for Teacher of the Year in Massachusetts. DESE came out with a really nice video series that Alicia she's an ELL teacher in our middle school, and congratulations to her for her achievement, and kudos to us to have her dedication, expertise on staff. So congratulations to Alicia. On a positive vaccine note as well, we're partnering with the town of Amherst to expand their capacity for the towns east of the Connecticut River in Hampshire County. So starting tomorrow, the vaccine clinic will be utilizing our high school gymnasiums, both of them, and it doubles the capacity that the health department had at the Bang Center. So they're about 2 or 3 days a week for the next couple of weeks, and optimistically, pretty much a full week the last week in February, when hopefully we'll have more doses to be given because of the bang center. The number is half as much as what they can do using the larger space of the gyms. We have electronic signage, they put out in front. They've really been great. There's no cross interactions. When people come in for vaccines, they go in through the back doors. They're never coming into the main campus where is our distance learning center and other staff working. They use bathrooms that are inaccessible to students and staff in the locker rooms. And the folks at the town will clean up with enough time for multiple air exchanges before high school athletics begins later in the afternoon. So I think we've fully quarantined and cordoned off the space. So thanks to our facilities department, Rupert, Roy Clark in particular. Jerry set up a better Wi-Fi access because that's really important in the gymnasium. There was good in the back gym. The front gym was moderate, but we want to make sure that it was hot. So it was higher. So we put another unit in there. And it's really, I will say in all this, the partnership of the town and the health department has been one of the positive outcomes of all of this. And we're happy to partner with them. And a safer community makes for safer schools. And in my opinion, a safer community has increased its capacity to vaccinate its citizens. So it's something we think we're doing for the good of the community. We also believe that the community directly affects the schools. So we're happy to partner with them, and Emma's been great to work with. AEF has their grant program out. So just want to note that Amherst Education Foundation supports our staff with innovative ideas that benefit our students. And it's a teacher grant program that they have been running for many years. It's highly successful. And I just want to plug that in this public meeting and also plug our appreciation. I'm saying our because I don't think there's disagreement on the committee of AEF and all the great work they do on behalf of our students and faculty. Later time survey, the school start time survey, excuse me. We have well over 1,000 responses. I think in terms of total responses, it's over 1,500. Not everyone loved the last forced choice question about which option do you prefer. So we have a little more responses on the qualitative than the quantitative, which is fine and understandable. But we have good turnout among students, staff, families. We have good turnout, I think not most importantly, but particularly importantly from Shutesbury and Leverett community. I really want to thank the superintendent and principals there. They've shared that with the Shutesbury and Leverett communities, school communities. So we have, because you're able to disaggregate, and you'll see this later in the month, by what school you're connected to, by what, whether you're a student, family, or a staff member. So more on that, but really appreciate the partnership, and we continue talking to our Unit 28 colleagues about all this throughout, and we met with them last week, and that's been a good experience. And I had my first of the optional town halls for staff members. We had a big town hall, and then Crocker Farm. I was there yesterday with Mr. Shea, and I think the next 7 days, I think I have 6 schools. Just every day in the afternoon is an optional. There's no presentation; it's just Q&A. But we're trying to do as much outreach as we can. We'll be with CPAC, I think, on Friday, PGO's Thursday, and we're trying to schedule the BPAC. So doing a lot of outreach, getting a lot of good feedback, a lot of good ideas, and that's the way that we want it to work. Last week, cold day, I think it was last week. It was last week. Pelham's kindergarten had an art walk, an outdoor art exhibit of students' work. So that was great. And I want to thank Lori, the teacher, for inviting me up to Pelham. It's cold and windy, but didn't deter people from coming and seeing a beautiful display of their artwork on the playground. Really creative use of outdoor space, and wanted to share that I really enjoyed seeing kids and families and seeing their artwork up with the staff who did a fabulous job. Then we get to standardized tests. So our staff have been on a number of conference calls with the state, who is still planning to administer the MCAS this spring. But students won't be able to take it if they're from home. They have not worked out the logistics of how that would go. It's begging lots of huge questions about how that would work, and would we offer it for families of kids who want to take the MCAS, and who would be the proctors if our staff aren't in, and is this wise? So I don't have any answers, but I have a lot of questions and concerns about this. So when we get to upcoming agenda topics, this may be a good one to add in as well. But including today, where 2 leadership staff members were kind of trying to figure out how this might all work. Desi does not have any ideas for us on how to implement administering an MCAS if we're in a remote environment. And so that's making it logistically quite complicated to figure out how to do this, but they're saying we have to do it, but they don't have any ideas of how we do it. So I don't want to go too deep into that, except to say when we talk about upcoming topics, that may be another joint topic that the committee may want to get more of an update as we get more information about. But I'll be generous tonight and call it curious. And I think I'll leave it there. And the last thing, we applied for the pool testing program that the state's running, and we got an email last night that we've been matched with a pool testing vendor. The idea of pool testing is that you test groups of people in a sample. If the sample comes back positive, then you do the Binex testing, which we already have operational for everyone, which is a quick 15, 20-minute response test. And so, we don't have all the details worked out, but we're just happy because in Eastern Mass, there's a lot of vendors, and Western Mass a little more complicated, and they wanted to work with Western Mass districts on shared courier service, and because all of these go to labs that are in the eastern part of the state. So I'll have more probably next week on that, but we're just happy we got matched with a vendor who's going to work with Western Massachusetts districts. So we applied for that program. I think I shared that at a previous meeting, and it was good to be accepted, and it was good we have a vendor, and now we have to figure out all the logistics, and that's particularly challenging without knowing who's going to actually be in the building. So we're starting with our distance learning center at the high school because we know who the kids are. We know most of who the staff are. That may shift a little bit with the voluntary return, but we got approved for all three districts, not every site in all three districts. So that's where we may have to reapply for additional sites if we're able to open them up. But getting in the queue is the hardest thing. And once you're in the queue, our understanding is expanding the queue number of sites is easier. We'll certainly have to get nurses trained and things like that. But that's in a nutshell. I was glad. I think I was more succinct tonight than I've been. So that's a whole lot of quick updates on a number of topics, but I'm open for any questions anyone might have.
Questions? Mr. Sullivan.
It's a comment, not a question. While I was tooling around Shutesbury for the last 24 hours in my truck, I was thinking about the whole bus thing and the early start and late start. And one of the things I realized is that if we do flip the schedules, then the Snane in Shutesbury will no longer be an issue for the elementary students in Amherst.
Yeah, that's on my mind as well. So just to comment briefly on it, it's also on my mind that if our bus runs, our earliest elementary bus run is quite a bit later than our current elementary secondary run. So one of my hopes is that maybe it'll reduce the number of delays that we would have in a typical year, or maybe make 1 hour delays instead of 2. Which might be helpful for it. Certainly increases instructional time, but there's a lot of delays that get made, and Mr. Sullivan knows this firsthand because I talk to someone he works with every morning when it snows. Is that the roads in Shutesbury and Leverett in particular, when it's still dark out and the sun hasn't come up, it's just next to impossible to predict exactly what they're going to look like when the sun does come up. And when it does come up and glazes over, it creates particular challenges. So having that little extra window, even if it's 45 minutes, 50 minutes, will actually make a difference. I think better snow calls and potentially fewer delays. So Steve, I'm glad you're thinking about it. And I'm giving your colleague there a winter off of getting calls from me early in the morning and worrying about his cell reception, which is primarily the first 5 minutes of all of our phone calls, is where he is and whether he'll have cell reception by the end of the call. So it's a great point, though. I appreciate it.
Mr. Demling.
Yeah, a comment and a question. So, on the MCAS administration, I think you said it about as politely as you possibly could, but it's unbelievable how many roadblocks the state is putting up for districts to implement responsible and caring education for children in this pandemic. Like from the beginning, when the governor didn't start talking about schools until August, and then the drip of requirements from DESE that continue to change, and then the vaccination bungle at the state level. I'm not trying to blame the state for the mismanagement of the pandemic itself or the pandemic itself. That blame in my mind lies squarely with Donald Trump and his criminal gang and his absolute abdication of responsibility and act of misinformation. So, just to be clear on that, but it is incredible, like how we just expect that the next thing to come out of DESI's directive is going to be so tone deaf. It's like the expansion of the required synchronous time at the elementary level, which they justified as being better for mental health without a scintilla of evidence presented. So it's really frustrating. And I think we actually have the advocacy thing for vaccines on the agenda already for next week. So
Yeah, that's right.
More on that later, but I could go on for another 20 minutes on that, but I'll just pause on it. So for start times, I'm interested because you've run a number of these staff forums, building specific so far, and you had a couple of public forums for parents. What are some of the issues, both positive and negative, that are coming up for people that we haven't touched on in school committee and public? And I don't want to just wait until the very end and then queue up all the things. And you've been an active part of a lot of these conversations. If you could just give us some highlights, questions, concerns from staff and parents, and what are people, what's the input like?
Yeah, so at the secondary level, I think on the student side, I think there's a lot of concerns about extracurriculars and sports. And even though we think we have a good plan for that, I think we've had a harder time communicating more directly with students on that topic. So that's definitely came up. It came up a little bit with the parent and guardian forum, and a little bit with the staff forum, but it seems very acute for the students. So we have to think about how do we actively communicate that we do have some fixes and strategies for that. I think there's some concern about at the secondary level about students who work, and would they, much like student athletes, be able to leave in a similar time frame as what they would under the current or the typical non-COVID schedule. I think there's a little bit of a concern about not so much the earliness of the start at the elementary level, but just all the logistics. And I think that's probably true across the board. I think the community's been really accepting, because I've been really clear from the beginning, and you all know this, that we're not going to have every single logistical detail worked out with a compressed time frame to make a decision. But we've gotten some really good ideas about how, for instance, the elementary morning schedule, if it's earlier, does it allow us to have a little bit less rushed morning? Does it allow us to do things like breakfast in the classroom and some things that we were working on? And instead of just pushing everything forward 20 or 25 minutes, which you certainly could do, really good conversation with elementary staff yesterday about what that might look like and sort of reimagining it. And you certainly could do it if we don't make the change, but I think oftentimes in life, when you make one change, it often begets a reevaluation of, oh, well, actually, we don't have to just move it forward 25 minutes, and we could really revision what our morning routines look like. There's a large interest in the elementary schools of having a more gentle entry into the school and not having students make a choice between playing with their friends or eating breakfast. I think this is always true, but all of a sudden you start talking about what start time looks like and when buses come, and it engenders a conversation that certainly could have happened anytime, but it certainly is happening now. There's a little concern, actually less than I thought, about childcare in terms of elementary kids being home potentially before secondary kids. It's there, but that's a predictable one we knew was going to be there. Dr. Guevara has talked to the after-school providers, and we're working on that. So I think a lot of the things that we thought going in were going to be concerns are concerns. And I think what I've witnessed in terms of surprises are some of the creative problem solving. I mean, the elementary morning, I really wasn't at the place of thinking about breakfast for the bell and what that is, but in conversation with the educators, that's an acute issue that they want to tackle, and this actually gives them space to do it in some ways. There was some conversation about specialized programs like preschool, and would their hours be adjusted similarly to our hours? When would early release days, what time would they, so a lot of logistical questions. But I think in general, what I've experienced is that people are aware of the research. I think they have confidence in the research, and it's about the trade-offs that are that have to be weighed, and what problems need to be solved. So, I think when you see the survey, there's a lot of, in addition to the quantitative data, which is what probably everyone's drawn to because we can make really pretty charts and graphs of, lots of different stakeholder groups. The qualitative research, while it will take you a long time to read, I think it's incredibly valuable. And so, we'll get that out when the survey is done, well before the school committee meeting where you talk about it. We'll get it out because it's going to take a while to read. Again, over 1,000 responses. It's going to take a while to read. But I'm gaining a lot of insights from doing that. And I think I'll probably leave it there because I haven't coded it for themes. But there's people really took their time to give us helpful feedback. So I appreciate their community's been so engaged.
Ms. Seeger.
Thank you, Dr. Morse, for that information. In terms of early start times and what you hear from educators, I'm wondering if that can be shared among educators, specifically ideas that are brought up in, say, Amherst could be shared with teachers in Leverett and whatnot. I don't know if that data is going to be in the survey and shared broadly, but it would be great if, since all educators in our area would be going through these kind of things of how do I do this and how do I do that, that some ideas get spread. I don't know how to make that happen. If I can help in some way, let me know. But as you mentioned, I thought this would be great to bring back to LES teachers.
Yeah, and I was with LES teachers last week, as you know, Bethany, and we're also in touch with the Northampton folks because they're undergoing the same change at the same time or similar change at the same time. So I do think there's actually some benefit of having, Leverett, Shutesbury, Amherst-Pelham, and Northampton, if those other first four districts I mentioned make this change, be doing it simultaneously for all the reasons you shared. But we'll be making the results public for everyone. But we'll try to figure out how we can disaggregate the teacher-specific feedback, because I think you're right. That's probably, in terms of dissemination and impact on practice, that's their voices are going to be really important.
Ms. Spitzer.
Thanks. Thanks for that update. I'll ask a quick question about I'm going to just second the vaccine thing. Thank you for your advocacy on that. And I'm happy to hear that it's going to be on the next agenda along with the MCAS stuff. I'll just do a +1 to both of those. And then for the pooled testing, I'm just curious. I think it's great news that we've been matched with a vendor. If I remember properly, we get 6 weeks where the state funds it. And then is it the district's responsibility to take over that cost? And is there potential, we know kids probably aren't going to be vaccinated for a while. So is this something that could potentially keep going throughout this, if we have students in the buildings in the summer or next year? I'm just curious about the time frame for it and potential cost to the district after the first 6 weeks.
Right. So the cost is significant, and we'll have to look at this over time. There are some districts that are using it primarily to test the pool of staff members and intensive needs students who can't wear a mask, so that the pool, just from a cost perspective, it really provides weekly asymptomatic testing of all staff members and being more selective in terms of the student pieces. Some districts are going full in. Of course, it's by consent system. You can't mandate it. So that's where it also gets a little bit complicated. So at this point, we're planning with what we know, which is our distance learning center at the high school. Now, the number of staff, number of students is pretty low there. So we're able to know it. I think when we get to the voluntary return to school and we look at those numbers, we are going to have to weigh some of those things and what stimulus dollars do we have and what do we want to preserve for the next school year. And there really will be some complicated calculus for that piece. But right now, the only nurse we have who's trained in it works at the high school. Right. So we know we can implement it soon at the high school. For the other sites, we have to know which nurses are in. They'll have to undergo training, not just for the pool testing, but also for the BINEX testing, because each site is, you need a specific license to do those kind of tests at each site. So right now, the only site we have testing capabilities is at the high school. Now, I think in the short term, for the symptomatic testing, the BINEX testing, if staff return to other buildings, they can go to the high school and we can figure out the logistics on that. Pool testing is a larger bear. So, it is something we'll have to address over time. The pool testing is less expensive than broad asymptomatic testing, but it's not a zero cost proposition. And as you'll hear, our budgets aren't wildly, we don't have lots of extra funds sitting around. So it is something that we will have to talk about over time and address over time. But I think in the short term, we feel like it's manageable within some stimulus funds we have and CARES Act funds at the scale that we have now. But if that scale increases significantly, we'll have to come back and have a broader conversation about the impact.
Any other comments or questions? Not seeing any. Are you, was that all your full update, Dr. Morris?
It was. Sorry, lengthy again.
No, thank you. That was really helpful. So next is the chair's update, and from my end, speaking for the Amherst School Committee, we are hosting an open meeting of residents on Thursday evening this week at 6 o'clock. That information is posted on the district calendar for anybody who would like to participate or attend. It is open to all. It is pursuant to an article in the Amherst Town Charter. At the request of a group of petitioners, this meeting is being hosted by the school committee to respond on a list of subjects from the petitioners. And those list of subjects and questions are included in the announcement about the meeting. As mentioned, all are welcome to attend and participate, and it's Thursday at 6 o'clock. Chair Hall, do you have any updates?
I don't, thank you.
And now we have school committee updates. Are there any announcements from members of the school committee? Ms. Dancer.
Just a quick update from the budget subcommittee. As you all know from the information in the agenda packets, Dr. Slaughter has been extremely busy working on budgets. So the document that we're hoping to prepare is kind of, it's a work in progress, but right now it's kind of at a stop. But I thought I would just tell you a little bit about how we're thinking about it. It would be something much easier for people to read and understand than if they were to look at the full budget document, which, you know, can be several hundred pages and have lots of information in it. One thing that Dr. Slaughter suggests is that we have some definitions of terms so that people can just see, what does this mean? And I think that's a really good idea. Other things that we talked about were some historical information about enrollment over time, because as we know from recent discussions that may have an impact as we go forward. And also how staffing and course offerings have been impacted by budgets and enrollment over time. What we actually can control, which is a small part of our budget. So I think something like 80% of our budget is required for all the things that we're legally required to provide, or that we have to provide because we need things like utilities and transportation. So we really don't have a choice there. So for people to understand where we have room, wiggle room, if we need it to do things, and it's actually not a significant part of the budget. So what else? I guess, so that's just kind of a little summary of some of the things that we hope that it will incorporate. But Dr. Slaughter feels, and I speak for myself, but maybe for the committee members too, that we think some kind of document like this could be very valuable, something that could be shared with the community and perhaps help them understand better when we have to make choices. So that's all.
Great, that sounds really helpful and interesting. So thank you to the budget subcommittee for all of your work. And I know you've been meeting fairly regularly on that, so that's helpful. I
would say we also should give a huge thank you to Dr. Slaughter, because most of the work of compiling the information will be his. You know, he's thrown some things out and we've had some good discussion, but he'll be doing a lot of the work.
Understood. Are there any other announcements from the school committee or any of the 3 school committees? Not seeing any. Okay. So we'll move on to our new and continuing business. And our primary agenda item is the spring 2021 in-person return planning. And this is a continuation of the conversations that we've been having over the last several weeks, both in these meetings as well as the regional school committee with the APEA executive board in planning for this voluntary return starting in February. And I will turn it over to Dr. Morse for that update.
Sure. So thank you. And what I'd like to do is just walk you through where we are in the process. Consistent with the language that you voted, I reached out and met multiple times now with Doreen Cunningham, Jennifer Ortiz, who work in our Human Resources, Equity, and Diversity Office, and then members of the APA Executive Board to try to work on how to do this. And the language I think you used was to collaborate with APA, and I'm glad to report that I think it's been, my experience has been that it's been a very collaborative process how to roll this out to staff. So what was in the packet is the email that went out to all staff members, trying to ascertain their decision to return to in-person instruction. And so the survey link has been active. We have over 200 responses, which I'm guessing is about half of APA members' responses we've received. It's due at the end of the day on Thursday. The email was co-authored by what we're calling the Volunteer Return Group. So it's that collaborative group between the three of us administrators, as well as members of the APEA Executive Board. And so, we really wanted to assure staff members that it's very clear where the school committee is, and I think some members of the community and myself about getting more in-person instruction going in, but we also, consistent with the language, know that it's a volunteer basis, and we didn't want there to be any coercion. So, our principals have been fabulous about if staff members have questions, being very neutral. We do have an email address, and we have gotten a number of questions from staff. That's a shared email address by this kind of leadership or organizing group. And we want to make sure that people are making decisions free of influence from anyone, that it's an individual decision. And we want them to be able to make it and feel good about their decision that they make. We also wanted to note that we may have, and I think it's likely we'll have staff members who are more interested in returning to in-person later in the year. So we didn't want to have a one-time choice. We thought that'd be really limiting. And I'll be honest that a number of the survey responses, there was no explicit question to elicit this response, but have indicated some people are certainly comfortable coming in. Some people just said no, but there was an optional comment box, and a number of staff members have responded, once I'm vaccinated, I'm good, right? And so I think I want to be transparent in this meeting without belying confidence in people who fill out an anonymous survey, that, the vaccine piece, however people feel about it, is a significant factor to many staff members. And so anecdotally, I knew that, and at this point, I think we have hard data that would show that. That's not to say that no one's willing to come back pre-vaccine. That's not at all what I'm saying, but it really does connect back to the earlier point I made during superintendent update. I know we'll come back to next week. So the survey also wanted to make sure that we won't exactly know what all the models are until we know who's returning. So administratively, when we get all the information Thursday afternoon, we'll spend the next couple of days sorting out what it looks like, what grade levels, what schools we're able to open, what students we're able to support. And at that point, we'll reach out to families and try to understand who's interested in returning. It's for us, asking families to return, if they want to return, if there's not a seat for them, is going to be a really futile exercise. And we don't want to set up families to be disappointed based on surveying them before we know what the model is. Particularly at the secondary level, there's a really unique challenge with that, because, if half of a middle school team is in person and half isn't, then we may have to look towards a distance learning model or some version of that to cover the times when students aren't in in-person classes. So it's not that it's easy at the elementary level, but the nature of changing classes at the secondary level brings about some unique challenges to us. So we're looking forward to getting the data back and then doing a lot of creative planning for that purpose. We did publicize the tentative agreement, which I think is worth mentioning in open session. I know it'll be potentially a topic in executive session, but I think it's important for me to say that the same protections around masks, PPE, ventilation, all the health and safety pieces that we agreed to are still in place in this model. So I know we said that in the letter, but I want to assure the community who may have questions about it that the voluntary return doesn't allow, or we're not looking at it as upending the fact that we're going to require masks, or the fact that we're going to supply KN95 masks to staff, or that kids and students will only be working in terms of main classroom areas in classrooms where the ventilation has been tested. None of those things are changed, and we wanted to be clear with staff as well as the community about that. So I thought I wanted to share that as well. You know, and I think the last thing is important too. We want to encourage. We feel like we're doing the right thing in terms of supporting staff members who want to come back. And there's a lot of reasons that we know staff members may not want to come back, and there's a lot of reasons staff members can't come back, either because of their health condition or a health condition of someone they live with. And so, you know, I guess I want to just publicly state that we want to make sure that no one's confidentiality or privacy gets upended in this process. That staff members may choose to come back, they may not choose to come back, and we're going to do everything we can do at the district level as well as at the school level to make sure that the privacy concerns that staff members, you know, have expressed are maintained, and that staff members don't feel undue pressure from anyone to make the choice that's not the one that they want to make. If people want to come back, we're going to welcome them back. We're going to take care of them. We're going to do the right thing. If staff members don't come back, we don't want there to be a perception that they're less valued in our organization, or that their work is less valued. And you know, that's the approach that we've taken. And not only is it the right ethical thing to do, I think it actually yields a better response, both in the short and long term, when there's no feelings or perceptions of coercion on the part of the, you know, principals, superintendent, and you know, educational leaders in the district. So we'll have more to share. Certainly, I think one last thing that's really important to note is we're looking about a return date of March 1st. I know the vote you passed said February, but when we looked at our calendar and looked at all the steps we needed to take about building a program that's not going to be a typical program, asking families, expecting a response, and then particularly all the transportation logistics of having some students in some schools back in session and not others, we didn't feel like right after the February break was possible logistically. So we are looking at Monday, March 1st as the return date for the volunteer return. We probably have a different timeline for preschool and intensive needs students and I think it's been publicly stated that there's an interest in staff return, and I think that won't be on March 1st. That should likely be sooner than that. But for the more general population, we feel like we want to do this right, and we want to do it and have it go well, and feeling like that right after February break, because our staff members, some staff members won't be working February break. It didn't feel like the right time. It would have felt really rushed. And we want this, again, our interest is that for staff members who come in, we match them with students who come in who are going to benefit from in-person learning, and that we have a successful model. Preschool is a little unique at the Crocker Farm level in that we'd sort of be creating a program. There's no students in person in preschool. In the intensive needs program, it's really weaving into the distance learning center that's already operating. So that's the kind of smoothest transition because we already have the model. We have the space, we have the administrative staff, the nurse there. For the other schools, it is more of an adjustment, and we do need a bit more time to put that in place. So that is my kind of summary of where we are in this volunteer return. I want to appreciate the school committee for taking an unusual step. It's definitely pushing the creative juices of everyone involved to think about exactly how this will work well for kids, but it does feel like we're trying to match people who feel comfortable and desirous of being in person, both students and staff, and I think that's at the moment the best we can do. So I appreciate the creativity of the committee, and we're going to implement to the best of our ability.
Okay. I have one quick question before I go to Mr. Demling. I hope you'll forgive me, Mr. Demling. So you talked about sort of intensive needs and pre-K potentially being able to come back sooner than March 1st. So assuming there's a draft letter of agreement that both the Regional School Committee and APEA are looking at, just rough estimate, how soon after those are approved do you think that we'd see those students able to return.
Yeah, I think intensive needs will be pretty quick. Again, they're fitting into an existing framework, an existing structure. So I think that can be very quick after that. I think for preschool, it's probably a little bit slower than that, just because we want to think about, preschool was in for 7 days, but this will be a different model. It's not a compulsory staff model. So also it's been a bunch of months, and some kids have turned 3 since we were in person. I think that one's going to take more planning. We have a great preschool coordinator who we're very confident, and the staff are very confident we can lead that and make that work effectively. It's a very small program, but it is a different site, so we have to get a nurse up and running for that site as well. So that's the additional wrinkle. So I think that one may be a little slower, but we feel confident it'll be before March 1st, assuming when the side letters get voted and agreed by all parties.
Great. So, Mr. Demling.
Yeah, so thank you for that update. Yeah, in terms of the timing, I mean, the motion was starting in February, prioritizing our highest need students. And, so that's what's happening with pre-K ILC going first, and then everybody else, being responsibly taken care of after that. So that's, and we always knew this was going to be a very high level challenging logistic and creative operation. So, it sounds like you're going about it the right way. I really want to thank the APEA leadership for their collaboration throughout this process. The email survey to staff that you shared in the packet was very informative and supportive, I thought. Like, really tonally, I thought very supportive of staff. It wasn't just one line about, no one's going to judge you. There was a lot of good information, a lot of follow-up. And it probably wouldn't have been as comprehensive if it wasn't for the collaboration with our union leadership. And that's, I just want to publicly acknowledge that's hard, because it's no secret that we're still in disagreement about other things, about whether or not to renegotiate the MOA. And so to work collaboratively on this effort, while there isn't agreement on everything else, that takes a lot. And this could have gone in a much different way, and I'm very grateful for the collaboration of the APA leadership on that. So in terms of the timing for everyone else, so that tentative return date of Monday, March 1st. So that was a bit of news in the packet there. So I presume that some number of families will be surveyed this month, and then it might be too early, and if it is, you can just say so. But have you thought yet about how that return would sequence? Is it everybody comes back on March 1st, or is it depending on the volume and where people are in different schools, it may have to slot in some sort of brief sequencing. Again, this might be too soon, although it is less than 4 weeks away. So I was just curious as to what your initial thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I think the secondary is going to be logistically the really complicated one in the way that you said. So I don't think we feel, based on the data I've seen, that we're going to overwhelm our systems in terms of the number of adults and kids that'll be in buildings. So I'm not incredibly concerned that, oh my God, we're going to have full, every building is going to be 100% full. I feel confident that that's not the case. How to structure a day at the secondary level with only some staff in is going to be a logistical challenge, and I think that may potentially take a long time. So I don't have a longer time, not long time. So I don't have a specific phasing plan yet until we see who's coming back, how many people, and what schools they're in. And I know some staff members have said, are we going to consolidate schools? Like if there's only X number of staff in. So there's a lot of logistical questions ahead. But we're not imagining the phasing taking 6 weeks, to be blunt. I don't think we'll have the mass of the quantity of students and staff where we'll feel a need to stage things and phase them in that way. Also, I don't mean to pick on your comment, Peter, because I would probably use the term myself, but I got corrected, and I think it's important that I want to acknowledge staff who lovingly corrected it. That when we say ILC is the elementary intensive needs program, but the side letter and the discussion is for the intensive needs programs pre-K to 12 or pre-K to 22, age 22. A secondary person who works in one of our intensive needs programs reminded me the other day, again, very nicely, that to watch my language, because I've been using the language ILC, which is probably, Peter, why you use the language ILC, but I apologize if I did that, but really it's about the intensive needs program. And I don't want people to have the belief that it's only the elementary level, because there are middle school and high school staff members who work in there, and some of them have indicated an openness to returning to in-person. So meant no disrespect if I said it tonight. I know no one else did either, but I want to acknowledge that feedback and make sure I'm publicly saying it correctly.
Other questions or comments? Not seeing any? More
info coming soon. That I can assure you. Once we get the feedback, then we'll have to really build the programs, and we'll have to have lots of discussions about what that looks like, and both with the committee and the community. So more soon.
Right. Thank you very much for that update. That was really helpful.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next item, we have, speaking of future meetings, future addendum planning. The regional school committee has we're meeting after this joint meeting, and we have a 4 towns budget meeting on Saturday morning this week. And then we just scheduled another regional school committee meeting on Tuesday of next week. At that meeting, that will be our budget hearing. So that was posted today, so that we have that 1 week notice for that. We will be looking at athletics for the swing season or the fall 2 season, an update on in-person planning and vaccine advocacy for educators in vaccines. We have our much anticipated February break, and then a joint meeting tentatively planned for February 23rd, where we'll look at school start times. Tentatively slotted our CPAC annual report presentation, and then the Amherst committee meeting will have a meeting there. Dr. Morris.
We should also put the return to school, because at that point we'll have a real clear picture. So we should slot that in, and that should be, if we could do that, the joint part. Sorry, I should have updated that earlier, Ms. McDonald, but I didn't. I also want to give plug, while people are thinking of other agenda items, to Amherst Media for covering tonight, Thursday night, and Saturday morning. So they're tireless in their support of us and making sure the community has access to these meetings. So Jeff, I'm sure you're watching your screen, and just give you a plug, and all the folks at Amherst Media, because we know that's been a plethora of meetings, and it's really important that our community is able to access them. So thank you.
Yep. And I'm guessing that the March 2nd meeting would also be a joint meeting, because that's when tentatively we're planning to vote on the change in school start times. Any other? So we have a medium meeting next week for the regional committee, and then a large meeting on the 23rd for the joint. As well as then for Amherst, the Q2 budget update, first look at fiscal 22 budget, Commandantist enrollment policy, and capital and school choice. Dr. Morris.
Sorry, I'll give people more think time if there's anything else, but just there is a Pelham school committee meeting on the 11th of February. As well, so that's a week from Thursday, and we'll be talking about things like budget and curriculum as it relates to health and gender, and a number of other topics as well. So I just wanted to note that this is a joint meeting. If I'm missing anything, Sarah, I know there's other things in the agenda, but just wanted to more note that there's a meeting a week from Thursday.
And also preschool.
Preschool, yes, thank you very much, appreciate it.
And the other meeting on the 9th, right now that's where we have tentatively slotted when we'll look at the middle school grade span report and talk about next steps and planning for outreach and decision making at that point. So planning discussion at that meeting. Any other items for any of the soon to be coming up meetings? Yep. Great. Okay. We do have, I think, some gifts tonight for the region and for Amherst. I will make the motion first. I will move that we accept the gifts, the following gifts for the region from Rebecca Woodland and Michael Hutton with Woodland to support the ARPS Performing Arts, the donation of a Cable Nelson upright piano, estimated value of $3,000. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald and seconded by Stancer. Dr. Morris.
Yeah, I just want to thank this family for reaching out to us. They had this wonderful piece of musical equipment, and we're hoping it would find a home that would be used. And Mr. Bechtold, our department chair, was engaged them in a level of dialogue that I cannot follow because it's not my area of expertise. And but really appreciate the community because this is going to be widely used by students in the future, and appreciate the support from our community members that they reach out to us instead of doing a whole lot of other things they could have done with the expensive piece of musical equipment. So just wanted to offer my acknowledgement.
Yes, it is a generous and nice gift. So seeing no discussion, we'll move to a roll call vote of the region. Mr. Demling.
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington.
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny.
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Lord.
Lord, aye.
Ms. Seeger.
Seeger, aye.
Ms. Spitzer.
Spitzer, aye.
Ms. Stancer.
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. And we also have a couple gifts for the Amherst School Committee, Amherst Region, or Amherst District, sorry. And I will make a motion that we accept the gifts as follows. From donor Martha Oliver, number 995923, to support Crocker Farm at the principal discretion in the amount of $10. And from Stacy Leonard and Stephen Saxonine, number 3939, to support the ARPS Family Center in the amount of $500 for a total gift amount of $510. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald, seconded by Spitzer. Dr. Morris.
Sorry to extend these, but Mr. Saxenian was a longtime math teacher at our secondary, at our high school, and just, you've heard me say this about others, it's just so wonderful and appreciative of our community that our retired educators continue to give back to our schools, even though they're not currently working in them. So just wanted to say a personal thank you on that one. Sorry, I won't extend more gift talk, but I think it's just nice to acknowledge some folks who are doing, and people I don't know, I apologize, I don't acknowledge, but I thought, when it's a former staff person, I'd like to acknowledge them.
Thank you. Seeing no discussion, we'll move to a roll call vote of the Amherst School Committee. Mr. Demling.
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington.
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Lord.
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer.
Spitzer, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. And now we have warrants. Are there warrants from the region, Ms. Spitzer?
I have two. It'll just take me a moment to bring them up. But
Chair Hall, do you have any for Pelham?
I do. I have one.
Why don't you go first then?
Okay, great. I authorize by my signature to payables in the amount of $58,569.19, and that was all in payroll. That was for a warrant dated January 27th, 2021, and I signed it on January 27th, 2021. And that's it.
Ms. Spitzer?
Thank you. So I authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $680,934.05 for the warrant dated January 27th, 2021. And this included general fund expenses of $130,658.16 and other funds in the amount of $550,275.89 for capital and stabilization. And this was signed by me on February 1st. I authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $644,837.05 for the warrant dated January 29th, 2021. This included general fund expenses of $489,382.61, revolving fund expenses of $19,542.11, grant fund expenses of $132,451.06, and other funds in the amount of $3,461.27, and that was for capital. I signed this on February 1st, 2021.
Okay. And I believe I have three. I think I neglected to read one of these at our last Amherst School Committee meeting. So I authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $118,899.57 for the warrant dated January 15th, 2021. It included general fund expenses of $51,282.50, grant fund expenses of $820.67, school reopening fund in the amount of $840.84, CARES Act fund of $65,509.45, and miscellaneous of $446.11. And I signed that on the 15th of January. Sorry. I also authorized payroll in the amount of $645,162.84, dated January 27th, 2021, and I signed that on January 23rd, 2021. And lastly, I authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $125,752.41 for a warrant dated January 29th, 2021. It includes general fund expenses of $91,219.03, revolving fund expenses of $533.96, grant fund expenses of $10,753.37, CARES Act fund of $22,535.95, and a gift to the school of $710.10. And I signed that on January 29th, 2021. And that is all that I have. So now I will move that we adjourn the Amherst School Committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald and seconded by Spitzer. There's no discussion. Mr. Demling.
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington.
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Lord.
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer.
Spitzer, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The Amherst School Committee is adjourned. And Chair Hall, over to you.
All right, I move to adjourn the Pelham School Committee meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Hall, seconded by Stancer. We'll do roll call vote. Ms. Stancer.
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Menino.
Menino, aye.
Ms. Barlow.
Barlow, aye.
Ms. Kenny.
Kenny, aye.
And Hall, aye. Pelham is adjourned. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Okay, so now we will move on and continue with our regional topics. And now we approve minutes that are in our packet. And we have several. I'm going to try to read the dates. Beginning with, I was surprised, I thought that this one had been reviewed, but it's August 18th. We also have September 22nd, October 22nd, December 8th, and that's it. Do folks have any edits on any of those? Ms. Seeger.
On August 18th, I'm listed as being part of Amherst versus the region.
Yep. I have one on the December 8th minutes. On page 2 of those minutes, it's minor, but I think it's important to get it correct because it's pertaining to the vote. At the bottom of the page, Ms. McDonald moved that we approve winter sports. This was seconded by Ms. Kenny, and I think that should be a period after Ms. Kenny. And then the motion, it should next read, the motion carried with I think the names are all correct, Mr. Harrington and Ms. Lord abstaining, and Ms. Spitzer nay, and 5 yes. Are there other edits to these minutes? Ms. Seeger.
I also noticed on December 8th, I'm listed incorrectly as well.
Any other edits? It's pretty good. Ms. Spitzer.
I can make a motion. I move that we approve the minutes, the Amherst, or the regional minutes as amended for August 18th, 2020, September 22nd, 2020, October 22nd, 2020, and December 8th, 2020.
Lord, second.
Moved by Spitzer, second by Lord. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, I.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, I.
Ms. Seeger?
Seeger, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. So moving back to our agenda, we will now, I will now make a motion that we enter into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation of APEA. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigation position of the public body and the chair so declares, and I declare, with the intention of returning to open session. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald and seconded by Spitzer, and we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, I.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, I.
Ms. Seeger?
Seeger, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. So we will now adjourn to executive session with plans to return in about 30 minutes. Great. Well, welcome back, everybody. And we will now move on to our next item, which is the second quarter update on the fiscal year 2021 budget. So I will pass it over
Doug
to
is, oh, I'm sorry. Doug is just logging on right now. And there he is. Look at that timing. Perfect. Good night. How's it going, Doug?
It's going all right.
Good. Do you want me to display the second quarter budget, or would you? I see you're in the office. I don't know if you have the screens to do that.
I do sort of, but it'd be best if you did, I think. It'd be probably
Okay. I will pull it up momentarily.
Probably we're not prepared for us to be running ahead of schedule. So thank you for hopping on a few minutes early.
All right. All right. I'm happy to be here. And so I'll
here it is. I got it.
So I think the short story is the following as far as the quarter two budget is concerned, and that is it seems to be all right, but there are a lot of open questions. So if you were looking at the quarter one and then you look at the quarter two, there's not much that's changed as far as the color coding along the right-hand side. You know, just as a reminder, red is areas we have some rather serious concerns about. Yellows, wanting to keep an eye on, and green seem to be okay. And so those are pretty much the same three areas that are in a color other than green as was the case with quarter one. And so I think just to take it in order, sort of top to bottom, first piece of that report, we talk about payroll accounts, how we're doing from the standpoint of our budget for payroll versus what our actuals are like. Earlier in the year, we were a little concerned around contracts, which has to do with some things. Mostly it has some of our summer programming that we do. We were concerned that had been a little above what we had originally budgeted, and it was, and yet we've been able to sort of moderate our spending in that area, and so we're sort of back to where we'd expect to be at the midpoint of the year, which is about 50%. So that's trending in the right direction. I think we're going to continue to keep an eye on our contracted spending of payroll. You'll notice under just regular salaries, it's at 46%, and part of that's because we've already recognized some savings in those areas, and we've sort of recouped those budgeted dollars to use elsewhere in our budget. And so that's part of why that is holding at about 46%. We would expect to be in some ways further under budget, but we have shifted some of our budgeting from payroll to expenses in order to mitigate some expected costs in other areas, and so that's why that's sitting at about 46%. And of course, substitutes is very, very low. We do have some. Teachers do need teachers and paras both need coverage at times. Often we're covering it with our own staff, but our overall rate of need for substitutes is very, very low, and so that's remaining an area that's well under budget. As we get into the expenses for the district over the first half of the year, most are tracking as would be expected. They're under budget in some ways, or if they are above budget, they're explainable reasons. So, for example, if you look at technology, that is trending. Let me find technology.
Information systems.
Thank you. Can't read my own thing. It's at 69%. Part of that's because we buy a lot of software subscriptions at the beginning of the fiscal year, so that tends to boost it up. You see the same thing when you look at our risk and benefits. We pay our retirement assessment for Hampshire County right at the beginning of the year. That saves us 2% overall. And what that does, though, is it pushes our budget kind of out of whack until we get to the end of the year. But just on the topic of risk and benefits, one area that we keep a close eye on is our health insurance costs for the year. And we're tracking right on those costs. So if we were to dig into the individual lines for health insurance, we're right on what we had budgeted for that. And so I think that will continue to be steady throughout the rest of the year. Excuse me. The two areas of concern that we have are the same two areas that we had in quarter one, and that is under the special education category and under the facilities category. And the reason for that is both of those contain expenses, both that we've realized and others that we are projecting for the rest of the year, in some ways related to our regular work, but more importantly, related to providing support around COVID-related things. And so the difficulty at this point in the year is to is to predict exactly how those COVID-related expenses are going to play out. So you had a discussion earlier regarding volunteering for in-person schooling. That's going to change some of the demands in those areas relative to COVID expenses. So our demand side of things, in other words, what our expenses are going to change throughout the year, depending on how the pandemic itself evolves, how our own response to that evolves, but also how the funding evolves. So one of the things that we have is a fair amount of support from the federal government, by and large, to help us pay for some of those unexpected COVID-related expenses. And some of those are standard grant programs. We've gotten a technology grant. We've gotten a reopening grant. We've gotten a food service grant. All of those funds have been expended to date, and so those aren't in here. But at the same time, our expenses we have incurred that we have covered with grant funds. We have some other grant funds we haven't yet decided about, and part of the reason why we haven't decided is because two big sources of support are reimbursement based. So FEMA related expenses and part of the CARES Act expenses are reimbursement based. So we have to apply for reimbursement. We have to wait for a response. If FEMA rejects those, then we can kind of go to a second tier under CARES Act. And so all of that's in process and is not quick, for one thing. I was chatting with Sean Mangano, my predecessor, who now works for the town of Amherst today, and we were both kind of lamenting the structure of this. And in some ways, there was no preventing it, but by having a reimbursement process, it's really difficult. And one of the things that's been really difficult about it is the rules relative to what's eligible or ineligible have been changing over the course of the year. And even with the new administration being inaugurated in January, they have put out that they would have expectations that FEMA should reimburse for more things than they have previous to this date. So the playing field is changing, and the rules are kind of changing as we go through. And so I think the short story is there's a fair amount of federal support to help us cover these expenses as we go through the year. We'll have to keep an eye on that. We want to preserve some of those for our coming fiscal year. And so there's a lot of unknown still relative to how it'll exactly play out. Just the raw expenditure to date and the expected expenditure and the funding sources that we know about in concrete terms, we'll be able to pay our bills. But I do think it provides a considerable amount of unknown, which is most of the reason why those are in bright red is that there's a lot of unknown there, and we'll be trying to get firm answers about how that's playing out and what sources will we use for what purposes as we go through the remainder of this year. Hopefully by third quarter, we'll have a much clearer picture on this, and it'll be critical in some of our planning for fiscal 22 as well. I think that's most of what I wanted to say about quarter two, and so I want to stop and give everybody a chance to ask questions if they have them, or pose any clarifying questions they might have as well.
Thank you. Are there questions, Mr. Demling?
Yeah, so I just want to thank you first that this entire sheet isn't all red. I mean, based on what we were looking at a few months ago, I was expecting this to be a lot more representative of the red color. So kudos to you. It sounds like the budget freeze was a good idea, and that helped a lot of those, even though that obviously comes with pain. Otherwise the budget would be different. But thank you for that. I just want to acknowledge that it's not an easy thing for you to manage, you and your team and the district to manage it, because everybody feels the pain of a budget freeze and has to adjust accordingly. So two things I'm wondering about for next year, as I know this isn't about next year's, but as this year's budget relates to next year's budget. So there's a couple of pots that both of these budgets can pull from, right? That we can kind of turn the knobs on a little bit, so that at least in my mind, where if we turn it down for this year, we could turn it up next year to kind of balance it off, knowing that next year's budget is obviously very difficult. So I'm thinking about the school choice reserves and also E&D, and I'm thinking about because I know there's some laws around this, what's the maximum amount of money we can carry over from one fiscal year to the next. And it seems like big picture wise, one thing we ought to be doing is trying to max out the amount of money that we can carry over, and trying to, as minimize what we're taking from things like school choice and E&D so that we can really rely on those next year to try and minimize the pain of next year's budget cut. So, yeah, is that something we're trying to do given at this point in the year, or have we already tapped out that strategy? Of just your general thoughts on managing that?
No, I think that's absolutely as we head into the rest of this year and we start to balance those resources, whether it be additional CARES Act. There's a new CARES Act passed in late December, which created what's now called ESSER 2, which is how the states funded those grants or named those grants. That's one piece of the puzzle, but how that interacts with, and typically those are to cover unbudgeted or unexpected costs. But if those can support us in a significant way, then yes, we will definitely utilize, the options available to us to sort of preserve monies for next year to help, buoy the district in that regard. One thing, so you mentioned two critical ones. School choice is one. We have a decidedly greater amount of control over that. There's not typically, to my understanding, a limit on how much of that you can sort of bank. And so if we get toward the end of the year and we have savings, we have a budgeted amount of school choice that we have expected to utilize this year, which was $550,000. We're not compelled to spend that. So that would retain that money and preserve the balance of our school choice revolving fund in a way that would be beneficial to us and be available to us for next year. The second sort of tool we have is, as you mentioned, is E&D. That one's a little trickier. There is an upper limit on that. 5% of our operating budget is the maximum we can hold within that. It's also having to do, what's interesting about E&D is it's an amount that's certified. And so, we finished fiscal 20. We're in the process of getting that E&D certified for the current fiscal year. And so if we're going to budget that, there's a couple of places where we budget money from E&D into our next year's budget. But you're budgeting next year based on your certified as of this year. And so I think as a result of how last year played out at the end, our certified E&D will probably be a little lower than it has been in recent years. To what extent, I'm not sure. There are aspects of our end of year that I'm not sure how the state will factor in as they sort of think about it. They essentially say sort of what's your sort of remainder left over sitting on hand. But there are a few different sort of rules around that as far as what's counted or not counted. So if you have things that you're expecting to receive, they kind of count that as not real money until you get it, that kind of thing. So I think our amount of E&D for next year explicitly will be a little smaller, which puts more pressure on us to do something more along the lines of using school choice to help support the budget. So those are all factors we're definitely keeping in mind. I think some of the difficulty with these reimbursement processes from the federal government on FEMA and the CARES Act, some of that, it makes the cash flow management difficult. And so I think we may find that during fiscal 22, we have these resources that come in because they'll come in so late relative to our expending, which is happening in large measure now. And so I think that'll impact and help our fiscal 23. But anyway, it's a bit of a moving picture on all of those fronts, but we're trying to keep an eye on them and definitely sort of leverage those resources as best we can to help us out in the current year and then as we look forward to next year.
Carrie.
Hi, thanks again, Doug, for putting all of this together. Two questions, and I apologize if they're a little in the weeds, but now's as good a time as any. So I'm just looking at the student services line, and it's showing that we're at 99.1%. And so I'm assuming that's funding something that we pay for early on in the year. Otherwise, I'd expect it to be red. So I'm just curious about what that line is. And then going down to food service, and I know we've received grant funds to cover the expense of distributing food, but I think it's just a little misleading if you look at where we've been spending the funds to say that we haven't been, the schools have been providing food even though students haven't necessarily been in the building. So I'm just wondering, where would that show up, if anywhere? Because I don't know. I'm just thinking about if I were a layperson coming and looking at this document, I'd be like, you haven't fed anybody, but I know we have been. So I'm just curious about if you could explain that.
Right. So I'll start with the student services first. You'll notice that the total amount budget is about $50,000. It's a fairly specific thing. The other thing I'll point you to is that we haven't actually sent the cash out the door for all of that yet. And if you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth column of the numbers there for that row, it's at about 28,000 or so. That's the actual spending we've done to date. The remainder in that next column is what we expect to. So what we have in that category, just in general, is that it's a known cost. We're fully expecting to expend that through the rest of the year, and we've, in a sense, sort of booked that money to be spent, which is why that one shows up at 99%. And so that's not to be of concern, just because we don't have any expectation of any unexpected costs to show up there, and hopefully there won't be. But I think to the food service question, largely food service is operated independent of this budget. This is our appropriation budget, and so that $150,000 is a support our appropriated budget gives to our food service to run its operation. To date, I think our food service is doing it well. They're doing a fantastic job, not to date, but they're doing a fantastic job of getting meals to kids. And the current program we're running, which is not our normal food service program, is one in which every meal served is getting reimbursed at the rate that's provided for free meals. And so we have a lot higher reimbursement rate relative to just a broad spectrum, but we're also not collecting any money from anybody at the same time. And so I think that number, once we get a little further into the year, probably third quarter, of a better sense of whether we'll need to support our budget in that full amount of $150,000, which was typically what we budget for that. But as far as the general program and operation of food service, it's not shown here. And so I agree, it is a little deceptive in that sense. And so we're holding that $150,000 for use if we need it, and then if not, then it can be able to support the budget in a different way. And then back to Mr. Dimling's point about sort of use of school choice versus E&D, et cetera, it can help bolster us in sort of balancing those things out.
Ms. Seeger.
Just a follow-up question for the food service. In a typical non-COVID year, is $150,000 the typical amount that's applied to that, or is it? I'm just wondering how much it's supplemented with, or how much of that's typically used.
In a typical year, yes, we do utilize all of that, or almost all of that $150,000. It's a number that's crept up a little bit, and partly because it covers, if we have, unpaid bills by students, that helps cover the cost of that in the short term. I mean, we still try to collect those after the fact. But it also, one of the reasons that number's crept up, if you look at past budgets in the last few years, it's crept up a little bit, partly because we're trying to expand our breakfast program and offerings there, and to utilize more local growers and that sort of thing. And so there's a variety of reasons, but that is typically used in its entirety. But it is a number we try to keep an eye on and try to budget carefully as we get back into some more sense of normalcy, more in-building service of food. We'll probably reevaluate that number and whether that's the appropriate level of support from our general fund.
Are there any final questions? Mr. Dimling.
So, Dr. Morris, no one likes to consider furloughs, but we've, obviously we've had to go there to a degree this year. Is that something that is still, you think, a strategy we need to be considering for this fiscal year, given where we're at with the budget? And one, just so that we can finish the year on budget, but two, also the more general question of, trying to have what buckets we are able to carry over in the largest amounts, and not being able, the carry down effect there. You just speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the least favorite parts of my position this year, has been having to expand our furloughs. We started the year with food service We're now expanded to AFSCME, which is drivers and custodial staff. You know, has it been fiscally effective? Sure. You know, is there a real cost to individuals? Absolutely, right? And you know, thankfully the government is helping out some to mitigate that cost, and we've had a voluntary system, so some people have volunteered for the furloughs based on their personal life circumstances, and that's been okay. But you know, it is a contributing factor to personnel costs being lower than they are. So if you look at the second quarter budget, you can see that it's more of an acute issue in some of the other districts I work for. And I'll leave it there since we do have a quorum of one of those other districts. I'll just, I think I'll make that statement. But I wish it was not the case. You know, I know you agree with me, Peter. I'm not at all suggesting that you don't, but it is a strategy that we're in better shape fiscal shape, because we were able to take those measures and implement them. And if you ask me if I'm happy about it, no. But if you ask me if it was good fiscal sense, it will contribute more to next year's budget, absolutely. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So thank you again, Dr. Slaughter, for that update. And I might suggest before we dive into the budget, I could really use like a 2-minute break. I don't know if others could as well. Are folks amenable to taking a 2 to 5 minute break? Okay. My cat is now too tired at this meeting, so he just left. So, but we're all back. We'll move on to our next item, which is the first look at the FY22 budget. And so there was a presentation in our packets, and for folks watching at home, that was also posted in the packet this afternoon or this morning online as well.
Yep, and I'll just preview, cue it up for Doug. So just one of the things to note is that this is a very difficult fiscal year. There's a number of reasons why. Certainly the COVID impact on all the town's budgets is part of it, but part of it is frankly that the proportional split for our 4-member communities. I know this is a really boring and technical explanation that has real implications, so I'll try to be as clear as I can. That our 4 towns, Amherst, Leverett, Pelham, and Shutesbury, rely on an ever-evolving formula, which we'll get into shortly, about how much each town is assessed. So even though you'll see under all these models that one town in particular is assessed quite a bit, almost under all models, 2 of the towns actually pay significantly less than they paid last year. So the net budget that we're bringing to you tonight, and we'll bring to 4-town meeting on Saturday, is not just we'll talk about the reduction as it relates to a level services budget, but it's a real reduction. It's what we're proposing, based on what we heard from the towns, is spending less money next year than we're spending this year. So I just want to have that framing that it's going to be a difficult year, and I know often the idea of a level services budget and why do things increase every year is this sort of controversial thing in some people in our community, but this is literally a reduction in the budget for FY22 from the current fiscal year FY21. So I'll have Doug go through. We're just going to go through the slides, kind of briefly given the time, and then Doug, I can talk through some of the reductions pieces at this high level, and we'll get into much more detail next week when we have our budget hearing. But I wanted to frame it at the beginning so everyone's really clear that it's a raw less money, right? The budget has less money in it for next year as for this year. We'll get into the weeds of level services and all that piece, but I wanted to be blunt that it's a very difficult budget year to start with. And I'll turn over to Doug, who will do some introductory slides. I'll talk a little bit about potential reductions. We'll pause before we go on to the next agenda item, which is capital, even though it's in the same slide deck. Doug, would you like me to bring that up again, or do you have that queued?
I can present.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
And so I will preface my remarks by saying if it looks like I'm looking at the ceiling, it's just because the monitor is currently above where my camera is. So if I'm looking like I'm looking at my at the ceiling, that's why. So it's not any other reason than that. So just tonight's presentation. And so we'll start with a quick budget timeline. Most of this you covered earlier relative to your own sort of meeting agendas and that sort of thing. Tonight's meeting is this budget presentation. On Saturday the 6th, we will have the 4 towns get together and have a conversation about how this budget sits with them and their ability to meet the requirements and quite frankly, hopefully a good honest discussion about and some consensus around what assessment methodology we're going to utilize to fund our budget for next year. Then a week from tonight, we'll get into more specifics and we'll go through that with you all at a budget hearing officially next week. And then when we get into March, we'll have the formal vote in preparation for the town meetings that are coming in late April, early May, as well as the town council's meetings in May and June. So slide along. There's a few key points I want to bring to bear. One of which is that the fiscal 21 budget just got finished. Literally, the state's fiscal 21 budget just finished getting fully implemented a few weeks ago, and as a result, our Chapter 78 for fiscal 21 finally got locked in. It didn't change appreciably from what we knew it was going to be, but more importantly, I think in preparation for 22 is what are called the minimum contributions, which are a significant component in our calculation of assessments, only got fixed in the last little bit relative to the fiscal 21 budget being fully passed. And that caused some shifts, and it made some small differences in percentages that each of the towns sort of hold. But those small differences can be tens of thousands of dollars depending on the particular town. And so it did shift things. So if you're thinking back to the forecasting we did in December, besides the normal things that changed by virtue of being further along in our budgets, that also is something that changed in a somewhat significant way that alters the sort of calculations as we go through. A couple other things I'll point out: our health insurance. We got those numbers from our health insurance folks on Monday of this week. We got it, and so it looks as though our health insurance is going to go up about 1.11% for the coming year. We factored that into this calculation, and that is below what we had originally projected. So that's helpful to our overall picture. We've gotten more information around what we think Chapter 70 is going to be. The governor's budget came out on the 27th, and so that impacted our Chapter 70 estimates. It also impacted our understanding of charter reimbursement and charter tuition costs, which kind of track together. So there's not a real impact on our planning there, but also on our transportation reimbursement, which we also think might be a little lower than what we were originally projecting, which was already lower than the current year. But what we've done is we've gone through this, your not advice, direction to us was to try to go through and look for about $1 million worth of cuts to try to get our budget to a place that was functional, and that the assessments to the towns were ones that they could meet. And so that's what we've done in regard to that. And so talking about the sort of revenue budget, I'm not sure, do I need to zoom in on this a little bit, or is this visible to everyone? It's good? Okay. So this is the sort of...
Doug, I would zoom in just if you can a little bit, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, just even the people who are watching it might be, that looks quite a bit better.
Okay. So just to orient you to this display, I know most of you have seen this many times, but what we're showing here is on the left-hand side, sort of areas of the budget, and so we start with the operating budget. Then we have a section on revenue, sources of revenue, whether it be Chapter 70, reimbursements from the state, et cetera. And then we get down in the bottom third, and that's where we talk about the assessments to the member towns. And as we go left to right across the columns, what we're showing, the first two columns are where fiscal 20 and fiscal 21 sit, and then we have a variety of scenarios of ways in which we can assess our member towns to fund our budget. So if you look at the top, in each of the colored columns, if you look at the operating budget, they're all identical. There's $33,009,777 is what a level services looks like at this point. we're going through and making about $1 million in cuts, and so our projected funded budget is $32,009,777, which is, as displayed there, 0.42% below the current year's budget. So it's literally almost a level funded budget as in our attempt to be responsive to the financial constraints in which we're operating here. And so from that, that level of need for our operating budget, we go and take out our known or projected sources of revenue. So we have Chapter 70, which is a large state aid picture. That's the latest number we have from the governor's budget. We have a reimbursement for transportation. Being a regional school, we get reimbursement for transportation. It lags by year, so our expenses this year are what fund next year's reimbursement. And so, besides the fact that the governor's proposal was a lower number in regard to transportation reimbursement, our overall expenses that we can count for that this year will be less. And this, just reflect back to what we were looking at a few minutes ago in the Q2 budget. Our transportation costs were at 39% as opposed to 50% at this point in the year. So we'll have less that will be reimbursable. So that's part of why we've dialed that number back to 700,000. Medicaid, again, with being remote a fair amount, our ability to provide services that qualify for Medicaid reimbursement, that number's been marked down this year. The charter reimbursement I adjusted relative to the previous slide. The others regarding interest revenue, E&D budget support, and contingency are all where they have been. Again, by virtue of the way the end of last year landed, I think that the available funds for use from E&D will be a little less, and so that's part of why the E&D for budget support is at 400,000, whereas in other years it's 600,000, 500,000, that sort of thing. So we went a little bit lower in that regard. That total of all of those different revenue sources gets us about $11 million worth of revenue. And so what that means is that the assessment that has to be carried by the member towns is $20,651,420 as we project right at the moment. And what we have in the series of projections here are different combinations of our regional agreement method, which is a 5-year rolling average of students, of student population for each town, which is shown in the far right column, and the statutory method, which uses the minimum contribution to sort of apportion costs. And then we also use what we actually have been using is a 5-year average of those minimum contributions, and a portion of that and a portion of the rest of it funded by the number of kids. So it's what we're seeing with the 45, 55, and 65% is we're using 65% a statutory method, and then the remainder with our method detailed in our regional agreement. And so, as you can see, as you look at those, the different pressure points and places that the different towns experience relative to their burden to bear relative to the assessment. One bit of news since we spoke in December relative to this, Amherst had some encouraging news on its revenue stream, and so they were the town manager and their finance director reached out to Dr. Morris and myself and indicated that their ability to fund the assessment would be able to be a little higher than what was originally discussed in December, which is making this a more plausible budget. I would suggest. Basically, they were of the opinion about a 1.5% increase from the current year was what would be possible for the town of Amherst to cover. And so that's as you look at the different models there, you can see that Amherst is kind of hovering in that range. But you also notice that and this is based in some respects on student population, but also on the tax base or the equalized values of property in each of the 4 communities, which is part and parcel of what goes into statutory method, you see the differences in what's happening with the burden that each of the towns is bearing. And so we have Amherst and Pelham who are going to have increases in their assessments, and Leverett and Shutesbury are most likely to be paying less than they did this year. And so I think I'm going to pause right there for a second and see if anyone has any questions about this for a second, or maybe Dr. Morris has some comments.
Yeah, could you mind mentioning, I think it's worth the request you got for an additional assessment method to be added for Saturday. I think the committee should be aware of that.
Right, so I was contacted today by Shutesbury's administrator. She had been in connection with the finance committee in Shutesbury, and they had asked for a 75% method to be included in that. And so on Saturday, I will wedge in between 65 and 100, between the peach color and the, I don't know what to call that other color, mauve, almost, not quite, dusty rose perhaps. Between those, I'll put the 75% number in, and you'll see similar trends. And so as you track across the four towns assessments, you'll see that Amherst is going to be, whereas with 65% it's 1.59%, it's going to track up to probably 1.7 maybe. Maybe not quite that much, but probably close to 1.7 or so. And Pelham will get up above 4% as their increase, and the decreases in Leverett and Shutesbury will become equally sort of changing as they go through. So Leverett will end up probably close to down a half a percentage point, maybe 3/4 of a percentage point, and Shutesbury will be at a significantly larger, they'll probably be at 6 or 7% decrease in theirs. So it'll be a striking comparison across the different projected ones. The current year, I believe, is the method we're using in the current year, I should say, is the 45%. So that's just as a touchstone of where we're sitting right now. So if we do what we did this year, what we're looking at is in that sort of faded olive green color there. But I know that there are differing opinions about how to fund this, and pressures in different communities to do different things. And so we'll have hopefully a robust but productive conversation on Saturday regarding these assessment levels and the implications on our budgets.
Question from Ms. Seeger.
Thank you for this information. What I'm wondering about, as someone who's been reading slides like this for a few years now at four town meetings, and I'm still not wholly clear on this, is so we're at the 45% stat 5-year this year. And if I understand correctly, a few years ago, we were trying to move towards probably the 100% stat 5-year average, which is the fourth column in the fourth colorful column. So I want to confirm that that's true. And then what I want to understand is, which is the column that is currently in the agreement between the four towns? Is it the column all the way on the right? Just some.
Yep.
Dr. Morris?
I'll answer that one first.
Yeah, Doug can take that one. It's quick.
So the 5-year rolling average of students is the far right column. That is in the regional agreement. So that is the sort of in the written agreement. But if we as a community or a set of communities cannot agree on an assessment method, then we default to the fully statutory method, which is one column in from that until we can reach an agreement. The state imposes that one on us.
And on your first question, this has come up a couple times for people who have been at a number of four-town meetings, like I have over the years. Some towns would claim that there was a commitment to keep increasing till they got to the statutory method. Some towns would suggest that it was really a compromise, that there was not all four towns unanimous support. My own personal viewpoint, having been more of an observer to those conversations, is that that same conflict that I just described was literally the same as the conflict within the meetings at the time. So I think I can understand both points of view for people who said, well, we settled that we were moving towards statutory, but for some of the towns, they settled for a year or two. They didn't settle for a long-term commitment to move to 100% statutory. But I think we'll likely hear that same conflict play out on Saturday, and especially given the additional request that came from one of the member towns, which I we'll see if it's palatable to some other member towns. I think the same thing comes up, and I'm just going to express a piece of frustration. Then we'll move. We can have more questions and move on because I know it's late. As opposed to it, and this is the general frustration of every regional superintendent. So this isn't particular to our 4 member towns, but the fact that Amherst, let's say Pelham, I'll pick on them. So Pelham would be up over 3% in any of these scenarios, while the net budget is going down, is just bizarre, right? And it doesn't happen in town departments, and it's a unique aspect of regional school districts, and it creates lots of tension. And if I was someone from Pelham in this meeting, not this meeting, but in the meeting on Saturday, and I think we'll hear this, it's really hard to stomach that town would have to be very challenged fiscally to have a over 3% increase to respond to a budget that will have $1 million in reductions and actually a net loss of spending capacity. So this is really where regional budgets, regional districts struggle. Because if you like in Leverett or in Amherst or in Pelham, which I have more familiarity with, we sort of know what the deal is. It doesn't mean it's always easy, but you don't have this additional variable of the relational assessments between member towns that can leave all sorts of hard feelings for predictable and understandable reasons. So we'll have to see if cooler heads prevail on Saturday. But I think the point you raised and the reason I'm spending time responding to it is a little bit of prep for Saturday, because this same discussion, the same disagreement, I think people are betting a lot on Super Bowl and prop bets, right? This would be like a really sure bet that this conversation will come up. There'll be a lot of tension between the communities. I don't know what the outcome will be, but I'm glad you brought it up because it's highlighting both for the committee and the public that this is a point of tension between our member towns, and points of tension, unfortunately, in regional school districts have large implications for students and staff. I'll get off the soapbox.
Mr. Demling.
Yeah, so when you present this, particularly this slide at the 4 towns, I think it's important to remember that this is a very large meeting where the background foundational understanding of what an assessment method is and what's in the regional agreement and what has happened in the last year or two, the knowledge of that is quite the bell curve in participants. There are some people there who could teach a senior level thesis course on it. There's some other people that could not define what an assessment method is and are going to struggle, quite frankly, to understand the minutia. So I feel like it's really important. It's your impossible task is to take this very complicated thing and at the very least frame the guardrails of it so that we don't get, frankly, ridiculous suggestions like, why can't we just pay whatever we want? Or why can't we just make up an assessment? And, and things like that. And, so I don't think you have to explain every single, get down to this is how, the properties are assessed and impacted by yada, yada, but just at least this is the regional agreement. If, we have to, if we're going to change it, we all have to agree. If we don't, the default statutory, and the last year it was X% statutory, because it is a very good point that I remember a member of the Amherst Town Council saying very specifically last year, we're agreeing to this, but we're not agreeing this forever, right? And I know that there are other people who would say, well, you did agree to it. So of course that argument is going to take place, and that's fine, and we do need to get it out in the open, and that's good. But some kind of guardrail about what it is we're talking about, I think would help a number of the participants, for many of whom this is either the first or second time they're trying to battle through this, and in a COVID situation nonetheless. So good luck with that.
Thanks, but I do appreciate those remarks and the suggestion. Absolutely.
Ms. Seeger.
I have a request because I've been looking at these for a few years and still ask the question every year. I wonder if there's a way we could just mark something on the columns to say, like, what is the current FY21 percentage, and then what it, like, just the question I asked before about what's in the contract and what's the default. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who constantly stumbles over that. Yeah, and thing, coming from a member town and looking at our LES budget, we also we don't run into assessment discussions like this with Union 28. I don't know if Pelham goes through this at all, but our share of what we pay can change every year depending on whether or not we have a bump in students or no bump. So it's definitely like there are years that, even a shift in students causing us to pay $11,000 more, which is extremely minor, but not to a $2 million school budget. It's not minor anymore. So we kind of get that from both being part of a union and then also being part of a region where you have that flux of kind of don't know where you're gonna fall depending on enrollment each year. It's really challenging for us in Leverett. I don't know, probably the same in Shutesbury when things shift as well. So we kind of get this unknown in both places every year.
I will just suggest, just mention one thing. I take the suggestion as far as more clearly marking what this year's current methodology is, as well as what the regional agreement method is, and sort of bringing that more clearly onto the form. So I'll definitely take that advice. The other thing is, and part of why we have these 5-year averages is precisely because of those, to try to mitigate some of those peaks and valleys. Because in schools the size of Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury, a given class can go from 14 kids to 20 kids pretty easily, just by virtue of who moved into town or moved out of town and that sort of thing. And those can have huge swings that are pretty profound in the budgets. And so that's part of why we've always gone with averages over a number of years' time.
And just very briefly on that point, I think to Ms. Seeger's point, one of the unique challenges of a split district, by split I mean municipal elementary schools and a regional secondary school, is that minimum contribution number. If we were, and I'm not going down a place to say we should be K-12 regionalized, like please, don't misinterpret the words. But if we were, then it would all balance in terms of the point that you made about the enrollments and the minimum contribution numbers. The reality is this budget has no relationship officially or otherwise to the municipal elementary budgets, and therefore a change in enrollment which affects minimum contribution on one end positively perhaps affects the other one negatively, and there's no ability to balance between those. So it is one of the unique challenges of split districts, unified regional districts that include all the elementary and secondary grade levels. They're able to balance that and we're not. So you're right to say that sometimes those differences play out really negatively on the municipal side and sometimes on the regional side. And that there's you can't do anything about it in our current structure. So I know no one's interested in that level of weeds, but I think the finance committees certainly are, and the school committees, I know you are, but I think it's a hard concept for the public to understand the financial elements and how, especially in the 3 small towns, small changes in enrollment can flip minimum contribution really significantly, with no ability to rectify that between the municipal and the regional district. So I know that's like the least interesting comment I've given in a while, but it's actually really important for this whole discussion.
Ms. Spitzer.
Thanks. So it's late. I'm hoping I don't want to tee up too much time, but I'm curious about we've talked about the CARES Act money in the past, and I think you've stated before, either Dr. Morris or Dr. Slaughter, that we've been very, the town of Amherst has been incredibly generous in applying some of that, the CARES Act dollar that we're getting to help us fund the regional school district's budget. Is that correct? Okay. So I'm curious, like, if Amherst were to get more, like if some of these positive changes that are happening in Washington could lead to more CARES Act dollars flowing into our area, would those dollars would be showing up on the town of Amherst budget and not as revenue in the regional school district? Is that right? And so would that impact their ability to meet the assessment amount that whatever is agreed on at the 4 towns meeting? I'm just trying to figure out, like, how does the CARES Act dollars fund it in here? Because I'm not seeing anything in the revenue side here, and in the revenues listed here. So I'm just curious if you could explain how that works.
Yeah. So a couple of things I'll mention. So first off, I think, we've partnered with Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury as well as Amherst relative to getting some support from them, using some of their CARES Act money. So on the second front of that, I would say that largely those monies have been for unbudgeted expenses, so they're not typically going to show up in these kinds of budgets. We haven't gotten just raw support that can be applied directly. I was, in a conversation today about back in 2009 when there was money given, and they literally just gave a chunk of money and said spend wisely, and you could support your budget in whatever way you wanted. This has been more targeted in that it's been much more focused on things that were unbudgeted and specifically tied to needing to meet the demands relative to the COVID pandemic. So that's a little difference there. And I think that's also a piece relative to any future funding that comes in. It depends on what strings they attach. We've had good partnerships so far with each of the communities. They've been willing in the ever fluid situation to be as accommodating as possible to help us out as far as filing and getting some of that funding. I will say just a bit of particular detailed information. FEMA, we are an independent financial entity as a regional school, so we can apply to FEMA directly. So we have been filing, applications and reimbursement requests with FEMA directly for the regional schools. It's that second tier where we have to start going through the member communities, and it just sort of adds layers to things. So that's part of it, and then I think also, from a revenue source standpoint, because it has been for largely unbudgeted and unexpected items, that's why it's not showing up on here. And while we do expect some things to ultimately become permanent parts of our budget, as far as, we'll probably always have hand sanitizer in our schools from now on and air purifiers and that sort of stuff, we'll have the next year or two to sort of fold that into our operating budgets as we move ahead. And they're not really reflected in a significant way in these estimates at the moment.
Other questions? Not seeing any. I think we can move on.
Yeah, so I'll talk about, speaking of expenses, I'll talk about the expense budget here now. What I would point out, on the far right edge of this particular slide, you see a lot of zeros, which is indicating, no change. And that's part of what we're trying to do in getting to a budget that is fundable by our four member towns, is to try to hold steady on what our expectations are relative to some of our costs. And there are a lot of years that there are some things that we don't change. There's a lot of instructional material lines that we hold steady for a couple of years before we bump them up, that sort of thing. But certainly we are trying to manage those expenses as well as we can to keep the pressure on, or I should say, take the pressure off the communities as far as the amount of assessment they're needing to fund. But as you would expect, if you look at the top section under payroll accounts, the largest increases are relative to people. Fully 80% of our budgets, people and expenses related to them. And so, those costs are driven by contracts that we have and we'll be negotiating this spring. So that's factored in here as well. You'll notice in the bottom left corner, there's a couple things. The amount of school choice money that I put in to support our budget is $600,000. That's a little above what we used this year. This year we used $575,000. I think we have, the resources to do that. It's not sustainable for a long period of time, but I do think it is an appropriate support to our budget for the coming year, given the unknowns that we have and a little bit less in E&D support that we might be able to have. We're going to return it. I did put OPEB funding back into our budget this year, and we reduced it. It didn't go to zero in fiscal 21, but I'm going to bring it back up to a funding level that helps support getting to a funding strategy for our post-employment benefits. And then as we usually do, we have factored in sort of what we have an expectation of IDEA, which is a federal entitlement grant relative to special education. We've factored that in to help support our programs in those areas as well. And so those are all fully into the budget. One other thing you'll notice in the central administration, there's a big bump up of about 6%, that $12,000. If you recall from last year, we pulled a chunk of money out relative to supporting our membership in IMSAN. We asked them for and got a reduced membership fee for the current year. And so I'm just restoring that in. I may have unintentionally, I'll admit to this, may have unintentionally over-reduced that budget line last year. And so this is trying to put it back into order. It's some of it would have been there anyway, but that is a sort of striking thing if you look at 6% relative to everything else. But the raw dollars are not that large. But it's a re-establishment of a commitment we usually have and want to sustain with the folks in the Minority Student Achievement Network. So I think I'll pause there and see if people have questions about what is on this slide.
Mr. Demley.
So the biggest dollar amount there obviously is the $714K for the projected increase in salaries, so a 4.2% projected increase. So most of our contracts are up for negotiation. So I'm curious as to what variables you're projecting are about those contracts in order to arrive at an estimated 4.2% increase.
Doug, I can jump in there if that's okay. So some of what we assume are that in most of our contracts, just about all of our contracts, there's step increases that are independent of whatever cost of living increase is agreed to. So, even if the COLAs were flat, and I'm not suggesting they would or should be, that's a different conversation I wouldn't have in a public meeting. The salary increases because of the step increases would go up significantly. Step increases, and Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, between 4% and 6%. Depends where you are, depends what contract we're looking at. But there's built-in step increases for significant portions of our staff. So you really get at that. That's the 4.2% should not be interpreted as there's a COLA of 4.2% that's within a contract. I think in terms of what any potential COLA would be with any bargaining unit, that would be an executive session discussion and negotiations with the bargaining unit members. So we can't comment on that. But I'm glad you pointed it out because it does stand out, especially that 4.2%. But the way teacher contracts across the Commonwealth are organized is that these step increases occur sort of year to year, regardless of what the COLA is for the majority of staff members in different bargaining units. So that really drives significant parts of the salary increases year to year. Doug, anything I miss?
No, and the only other thing I would add is that we will negotiate either an extension of the existing contract or a new contract with the unions, and so we have put a placeholder number to consider. So we have planned for a range of outcomes relative to those negotiations, and so we do have that in the mix, as it were, here. So again, we need to be careful not to sort of negotiate outside of the constructs of those negotiations, but we do and try to factor that into the mix of projecting this, so that we have a real number that we're as real as we can be. I mean, it's like a lot of things, we're making estimates of what we think, but that has been factored in as well, and is part and parcel of all of that.
Ms. Kenny.
So I think I caught most of the letters you ran through at the bottom as you were explaining them, except the OPED. Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, so OPEB it's often called, stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits, which is largely health insurance for retirees. It's not exclusively that, but it's almost exclusively that. We're required to track that expense, a projection of that expense, and try to make and to fund that future expense in much the same way we do with pensions. So when when we talk about retirement assessment, the OPEB is not as strictly regulated as the pension. The pensions in the mid 80s, the state realized that cities and towns were not necessarily funding their retirements fully, and so they sort of forced their hand and required them to actively and aggressively fund their retirement systems. They haven't gotten to that place with the other post-employment benefits, but nonetheless, they're making us sort of tally up the number and put it on the thing. And you know, when we want to go and borrow money, having a strategy and a fund, you know, both for managing the money and also funding that liability in our future is one of the things that those people that loan us money look at. So, you know, to continue to make progress on this is important to, you know, our ability to borrow and to borrow at a competitive rate.
Ms. Seeger.
I apologize if I missed it because you might have said it, but in terms of choice being applied, how much do we usually apply year to year? Is that variable?
It does vary year to year. The last couple of years, we've used $550,000. You know, the goal with choice, and you'll have this conversation in a little bit when you talk about choice, but the idea is that you're trying to you know, generate some revenue and try not to have your costs go up. I mean, it's not perfect, and so, but also, you know, you're trying to you know, hold and maintain a funding resource that can be available to you in years that are more difficult or less, and in years that are less difficult, you use less and sort of build that resource up. And so this is one of those years where we're going to tap into the resource a little deeper than we might normally. But again, I think our balance in our fund is such that we can tolerate this, you know, certainly for the year coming, and maybe we'll see how the next years play out. But it's a little higher than in past years, not wildly so, but a little bit higher.
There's no other questions, and maybe oh, Ms. Stancer.
I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask this question, but in the expense accounts, I'm curious about, it's a pretty high percentage decrease on the special education, and I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think I'll be very broad with the way in which I describe it, but it really in some ways is driven by what students we are expecting next year. And so when we have changes in who those students are and what their needs are, then we can make estimates that trend in this direction. So I think that, you know, we're in a circumstance where a changing population is kind of reflected there. There are other years when it's the reverse of that number. It's up by a large number because we're anticipating a new student or that sort of thing. But it's a quirk of our enrollment and what the needs of those students are.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So maybe move on to the next slide.
Sure. So I think the superintendent wanted to speak to this slide a little bit more than, and so I'll let him carry the water on this.
Sure. So just timing it out to going back to one of Dr. Slaughter's first slides as well, but budget hearing next week. So by the weekend, we'll be publishing a more detailed list of what would comprise the reductions that are being proposed, and that'll be shared both with the committee and publicly so that people can comment on it. But in general, to get to about get to the neighborhood, we're talking about $1 million reduction from the level services budget. On the staffing side, it would be 16.5 FTE reduction in staffing. That includes reductions in the district office, administration, professional staff, and paraeducator staff. I know I'm reading slides, but I want to make sure not everyone may be able to see this who's watching. The staff reductions, we looked as much as we could about student enrollment and trying to match reductions to student enrollment, but it's not as easily said than done. You know, if you do that equally, you don't end up with staff. You end up with, oh, well, we'll have 0.78 of our, you know, X teacher. That we're talking about real people and real classes that don't do well with complex decimals. So the reality is we may see increases in class size, and we may see less elective offerings as a result of some of these reductions as well. It can't just be tied to student enrollment. We tried as best we could. We made a deliberate attempt to not fill vacancies as much as we could to retain our current staff members, just bluntly to reduce reduction in force notices for 3 reasons. One is that we like the staff we have. We want to maintain the talent staff we have with us. Second, as you know, is we've had a significant push the last few years to increase the diversity of our staff. And we're trying as best we can to not undo the work that's gone on that's resulted in, really some significant changes in the composition of our staff members. And to be blunt, the third thing is that financially it makes good sense, in terms of when we're not replacing vacancies and shifting versus having reduction in force notices. That helps Dr. Slaughter's office as well, with some cost there. I want to be blunt too. I'm not at all suggesting that there will be no reduction in force notices. In this budget, there would be reduction in force notices given to staff members. We can't avoid that with $1 million of cuts and 16.5 FTE reductions. I think what I'm trying to express is that the number of RIFs, reduction in force, would be less than 16.5. We're trying to do it kind of to maintain staff, all the reasons I just said. I'm not going to repeat myself. And that's in addition to non-personnel reductions. The example here, the easy one to talk about is Chromebooks. We purchased so many this year with CARES Act funds that we don't need to replenish. So we can make a pretty significant reduction in the budget line for Chromebooks next year because of the purchasing that happened this year. But this is going to be a very, very difficult budget. Again, the detailed information will be coming out soon. We'll have the hearing next week. I imagine there'll be a lot of voices in that hearing, and I'm glad for it, even if it's people who want us to do different things than what we're proposing. That's the nature of it. But this is the third year of my 5 years where we're talking about cuts in the magnitude of over $500,000. And second year in the last few years, we're talking about $1 million or over. At some point, declining enrollment just doesn't cut it, right? It's not going to get us to $1 million, every other year, every third year of reductions. And so, I do have concerns about the kind of future sustainability of the program that we want to have. And again, I think we can try to do the best we can, and we'll talk about that in detail next week. But I do want to be able to realize these are real cuts. These aren't around the edges cuts or things that won't impact things. If there were those things, we've already cut them in the past. So I want to acknowledge our leadership team for being really thoughtful in how to approach this and looking at the places where, declining enrollment means we can do this, but declining enrollment doesn't get to $1 million. Just very simply put. And so more details on this to come. I certainly can take questions, but probably can't answer all that much more specifics until we get to next week. But I did want to share what's coming so that people have a sense of where the details that you'll see are coming from and how we approach the challenge this year. Maybe because it's 9:30. Oh, there is a question I was going to say. Might be because of the time of day.
Mr. Demling.
Yeah, it's more of a comment that, I think that fully understanding in as much detail as possible what these cuts mean is really important. This is more detail than we had before, which is good. But I think one thing that I would encourage you to communicate at the Four Towns meeting a few times is that you will be sharing these details soon, and that as the decision makers in the towns who fund our schools are going to be thinking about the level that they can fund our schools at, that everyone in all the towns and the public and school committee, we need to be doing this with eyes wide open, right, about the impact of it. And obviously nobody wants to reduce school services, but we need to understand the consequences. And for my own part, and I know we'll have more time to talk about this from a school committee point of view, but it's hard to look at this and not have a gut reaction, which is this is not a level of reduction that I'm comfortable with. This is not a level of reduction that I want to approve for our schools this year. And I do think it's appropriate for the district to be proposing this, like as it was framed, right? You have to thread the line between what the school committee has directed you to do, which is don't cut more than $1 million, and the obvious pressures and strains that our member towns are under, and to try and thread that needle. So approaching the Four Towns meeting, I think this budget is, this is a reasonable proposal given those requirements.
but it's really hard to think about approving this level of budget given what we have already cut in the last several years. Because the one thing about cuts, and it's not that obvious when you're doing it in the moment, is that we never get it back. Right? When we reduce, level services increase, you showed on the previous slide would be 2.7%. We're not going to get a level services budget increase next year plus 2.7%, right? No one's giving us a 5 or a 6% budget increase, right? So when we cut when we cut into the bone, right? Class sizes, electives, major programs, support services, they're gone forever. And it's really difficult to understand the impact of that, I think, sometimes. And because we just have this notion that awesome public schools are just part of Amherst's DNA. And because it's been that way for decades, and we just sort of have this like association. And the harsh reality is that if we cut too close, it's not going to be like that. And we'll be old and gray telling our grandkids about the days when, Amherst Public Schools were known as the greatest in the region. And that only happens because we support them. And, I'm not really saying any value thing that anybody disagrees with, but it's really important, I think, to continue to emphasize that when we cut things, they don't come back. And we need to be really careful about what we do to what is a magnet for people to coming and living in our town.
Yep. And I encourage you to say that on Saturday. But yeah, so again, more to come. Agree with that sentiment, Peter. I'm just aware of the time. We still have capital and still have a school choice hearing. So if anyone's waiting to speak at that hearing, I'm just want to make sure that I don't think the capital is too controversial. I'm sorry, Ms. McDonald, go ahead.
Yeah, I did. It's just like two thoughts. So building on the Mr. Demling's comment about sort of and yours as well, Dr. Morris, about the history of cuts. I wonder if there's opportunity to add to the stripy, colorful chart table that goes. It shows current year budget, prior year actuals. But I wonder if you could go back 1 or 2 more years also, so that we can see that trajectory, because I think everybody understands that this current year is reduced because of COVID. So we really only have sort of one non-COVID year in there. And I think it might be helpful framing to sort of have that in front of us, so that when we want to talk about sort of this continuous, numbers of cuts that we have to make, and sort of that can't come back, we can point to that sort of right on the same page. And particularly for folks that may not have been at 4 towns for the last 4 years. And my other question, and you might not be able to answer it, so I apologize for asking, but it might be helpful, because when we were talking before, it was just sort of, just thumb in the air saying roughly 20 to 25 FTE. We're now looking, now that we have more numbers, we have the state budget, we're saying 16.5 FTE reduction. And that's not all RIF. Is there orders of magnitude how much of that might be RIF? Are we talking 4, or are we talking more like 10, right? Like that might be, that I think that would be really helpful to understand how much of the reductions from not filling vacancies and other adjustments are we able to make without RIFs, and sort of understand just proportionality of that 16.5.
Yeah, that's something we could definitely bring next week. I think because we haven't had that conversation with the staff, I want to be really cautious about sharing that in a public meeting, because that's our process, is we'd certainly let staff members be informed. And there's a lot of moving pieces, and the bumping scenarios are complex, particularly at the regional level, with licensure being, subject specific and sometimes sub-subject specific. So we're still working through all those pieces, but absolutely we can have that information for you on Tuesday.
Are there other questions or comments from folks before we move on? I'm seeing none, so we'll go on.
So are we ready to get into capital, or was there another piece we want? Was there a piece that was going to happen before capital? I forgot.
Oh, capital is Superintendent. Sorry, because it's in the one PowerPoint, I wasn't thinking about that it's a new agenda item, but yes, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is capital.
Okay. So I will just say this regarding these capital projects. You know, I had a shorter list when we met in December. I've added to it partly in conference with our facilities director, and so it's a bigger list. You know, some things are things we've had on the list and brought back. Some are continuation of things we shrank last year. So the first one is the high school, the walk-in cooler freezer. It says part 2 because we only sort of, you know, put aside enough money for part of that, and so that's a project that's sort of midway. Several of those are ones we've all seen before. If you've looked at these, one new one is that high school data center upgrade. That's primarily you know, adding additional. Well, it's replacing an existing air conditioning unit and adding a backup. And upgrading the general system in that area where those servers reside in the high school building, and you know, now more than ever with the amount of remote work that we're doing, that sort of infrastructure is essential to function at all times. And so that's a new one, not terribly expensive as capital projects go, but nonetheless a new one on the list. I think the other one that I would point out that's particularly new, some of the concrete repairs. You know, at the middle school building, you know, the salt and sand that we use is a deleterious effect on concrete over time, and the building's, you know, pushing 50 years old. So, you know, it's time to do some of that work. That's a little more expensive. Another one that I will say that is on here that is potentially may have to come off just because what we do with the capital is we borrow for it. The HEPA filter replacements, we bought a lot of nice new air filtering machinery, and you know, to replace all of the filters is a pretty sizable thing. So the idea was to sort of get a chunk of money up front to help us transition into making that an operating cost. However, one thing that I forgot about when I put this on here and have subsequently been reminded of is that when we borrow money, there's a factor of useful life that's involved. And so it may not be an allowable expense that we can borrow for. So that one may come off. So I'm awaiting a response from our bond counsel, our borrowing folks to get some clarity on that one. So that may come off. We may have to find some you know, CARES Act money to help us out with that, or something else. Asbestos management is another one where that's new on the list and is you know, we have asbestos in our buildings. New buildings get built with asbestos. You know, it is still a very useful product, but nonetheless, it requires management. And what this would allow us is to be able to respond when we have circumstances that arise, and be proactive in some cases with regard to that. So we haven't had a set aside of some money available for managing asbestos-related problems in our regional schools, and the facilities director myself thought it would be wise to put that in the mix. The one thing I will say on the parking lot light upgrade, because I know this will tie into the conversation about renewable energy study, is that the lights, you know, the $10,000 for those lights is the light fixture themselves at the top. The poles are staying. It's really a fixture-related ask and a project. So it's a pretty minor change to the lighting structure. The lights that we have in there are sort of first generation LED, and so, you know, they're not as durable as the newer ones, and they're showing their age in some respects. And so that's why that project is in there, and so we'll get hopefully some feedback from you guys, but also feedback from the 4 towns as to whether, you know, funding all of these is going to be possible or likely. And I'm going to slide to the next slide. So the total ask for the coming year is 542, which is a much bigger number than we've asked for in recent years. The good news is that doesn't actually hit our assessments until, let's see, fiscal 23. There's a lag of a year because we would borrow the money next year and then pay for it the following year. But what it does do is it has an impact here on this slide, which is our capital assessments. And so you'll notice in not so much in fiscal 22, but in fiscal 23, it kind of jumps up a little bit, and that's by virtue of this being a little larger series of S. And some of that depends upon whether we actually borrow the full amount that we're asking for this year. And then the other note I will have relative to this series of projected assessments for the towns is that the authorization for the middle school roof, it's a $3 million authorization to borrow. Currently is showing up in the assessment in fiscal 24. It's likely that'll get pushed out another year. I haven't yet, but it's likely I'll get pushed out. The state's ability and capability of funding projects like our roof are kind of getting pushed out a little further each year. So we'll still probably have that project a little further off in the future. And of course, there's some items that we haven't put into the agenda of capital projects in the future that we will need to get scheduled. And one of those large ones is the Fields project, which we've discussed in past, literally about a year ago, as well as some other infrastructure things that are pretty sizable. But we're not quite ready to strategize when those would hit the capital planning process. So I think I'll stop there and let you guys ask questions about the projects themselves or that sort of funding structure. And so I'll pause here.
Any questions? I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, sorry, Mr. Sullivan.
It's not a question, it's a comment. Thank you for sticking the girls' locker room back on there again, because for anyone who's not aware that in 2012, the boys' locker room was renovated and we're still waiting to do the girls' locker room. So thank you.
It's definitely a project that needs being done. I can say from having been in the boys' locker room, it's markedly better than it was before. And so I can, and we've done a small little bit of work in the girls' locker room, but it's desperately in need of additional work. And it's just not, it's in part of the oldest part of the building at the high school, and so it needs to be tuned up a little bit.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none. Okay, I think we're all set and can move on to, are you staying with us, Dr. Slaughter, for this one? Or? Yep. Okay. So our next item is a school choice discussion and hearing.
Right, so we didn't receive any public comments about school choice, but I will just share my opinion, and then the public certainly has the opportunity between now and the vote, which wouldn't be till next month in March, to offer any feedback. So a recommendation I'd like to make to the regional committee is that I'd like to ask you to vote to have the region become a school choice district again next year. I'll be candid, we're not looking to increase significant amounts of school choice students, but I know from Dr. Slaughter that we are using more school choice funds. And the reality is we don't know what next year is going to look like exactly. Are we going to have a virtual option? Are we going to be in person? So I think there may be ways to increase or to take more school choice students without influencing a lot of the things that we're wanting to do here. So, I think the request would be for the committee to entertain becoming a school choice district for next year, and be incumbent on me to be communicating more frequently than a typical year, whether we're taking school choice students, so that the committee has the opportunity to ask me questions on potential impact. I'd rather not close the door on taking more school choice students until we know what our system is, what our program is, and what are the potential impacts of taking school choice students. I'd rather have the flexibility, in short, than to close the door. It may be the case that we don't take any, we don't open up any seats, but I think until we get there, till spring and summer and our program's designed, I'd rather have that flexibility than to not have it. So, I'm happy to take any questions or comments. We're not coming back to this till, I think on the agenda, it's like, March 9th, I think would be the date that I'd be potentially asking the committee to vote on. So there's plenty of opportunities for the community to offer feedback as well as the committee, but that's my initial kind of recommendation to you is again, a very soft school choice vote in some ways, but continued conversation if we indeed take school choice students and having conversations, whether that's in person, whether that's students who choose virtual, and what is the potential impact on space and programming for next year. So that's my 2 cents for now, and happy to take any questions or comments at the moment or to wait until a future meeting.
Can I ask a clarifying question just for, I feel like I knew this and have forgotten, but it might be helpful for the public to also understand is when you say to accept school choice students next year, is that in addition to school choice students coming from our sending elementary districts?
Yeah, so that's a great comment. So at the regional level, we are tied to accept students from the 4 sending districts who are school choice. That number has increased significantly over the past couple of years as Amherst has taken more school choice and Shutesbury and Leverett have taken, well, Shutesbury has even taken school choice at all, and Leverett's taken more school choice. So it's really about beyond the students who are entitled to have school choice seats, either because they were part of the region in the current year as school choice students or because they're incoming 7th grade from sending districts. So it'd be looking at, primarily, frankly, at the high school, because the middle school, as you note, likely will have a sufficient supply of incoming students. I think the other reality that we don't know what the enrollment's going to look like in general next year. And we may, have lots of students come back. We may not have lots of students come back and have empty seats that we want to fill for financial reasons. So that's why, it's a bit of a hedging a bet where we don't have to make a decision to definitely take school choice students, but if the situation allows for it and it's going to support our operating budget in the future, I think we'd want to seriously look at accepting more than just the incoming students from our sending districts.
Ms. Seeger.
I could just use a little bit of background, this being my first time hearing about a discussion like this. Is this the yearly, we should look at school choice to see if we're still a district or region of choice? Okay.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And is it guaranteed that, I know there'd been some question about whether or not students that say we have school choice into Leverett automatically come into the region, but that is the case, that you make space for those students?
For another 5 years, yes. So the law changed a year and a half ago, but it's the students who are currently in before that law are grandfathered in. It's really the incoming, I guess it'd be the kindergartners. I can't remember if it's everything's so weird with COVID. So I can't remember if it's kindergartens or kindergartens and first graders. I think it's the latter who are no longer grandfathered in that system. And when they matriculate up to the regional level, they will not be guaranteed a spot. Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's this year's K and 1.
Any other questions, comments? I just have I know you're speaking about it from the flexibility, but we were just talking about potentially increases in class sizes in the high school, given the cuts that we will have to make. So I guess the question is, but it wouldn't be because we're taking school choice students in.
Yeah, we would only really look to do this once our students that we know are registered, are enrolled in classes and taking a look at what's our capacity. I think the real variable, just to be really candid about it, is are we going to have a virtual option for students who want a virtual option next year, particularly at the secondary level where that's harder to sort of actualize than at the elementary level. I'm not hedging a bet one way or the other. A lot of bet language this week, but tonight. But I think it's hard to say. But that's where when we talk about are there seats in classrooms, it's a little hard to know until we develop what the program is. And so that's what is hard to figure out exactly how to define, and that's why having the flexibility to get to the summer and say, hey, here's our program, here's how many students came back that we weren't sure about, and having 10 students in 10th grade would actually fill some seats and fill out some classes in some nice ways that don't take away from, don't really increase class size in the ways that we're uncomfortable. Or it could be the other scenario where we just don't take any students. But the reality is I don't even think by the end of this spring, we're really going to know. I think it really is going to be a summertime decision.
Great, thank you. Ms. Kenny.
So I have a couple of questions, I guess. So I guess I didn't, okay. So students can choice in to the elementary schools, and they, as long as they're second grade and up, are guaranteed spots in the middle and high school. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. So, however, if you are in, say, 8th grade or 10th grade, the middle and high school do not take choice students currently.
This year, that's correct. Historically, they have, but this year we did not.
Was that a COVID thing or a non-COVID thing?
It was originally a non-COVID thing, actually. It was just like we looked at our class size and said, you know, we're looking kind of full because we made reductions last year. So this is actually a pre-COVID thing last year.
Okay. And so, right, and then for moving forward, so say we say, yes, go ahead, be a school choice. That does not mean that you must take students if you say there's not enough space. I know that happens in Pelham. You have a class and it's full. You can't take any more kids. So that could, so I guess I don't see like what the benefit would be to say, no, we are not school choice, because you already don't have to take students if you feel like they don't fit nicely into your class sizes, correct?
That's correct. I think the last year, some of the thinking is we wanted to reset what our enrollments would be. And we didn't want to mislead people because we were pretty confident we weren't going to take choice. Obviously, hindsight's 2020, and the virtual seats that kids could have taken would have been fine this year. But we were really trying to reset enrollments, and also the other hindsight 2020 is our enrollments have changed considerably from what we were anticipating. But I think your larger point's right. I think we can run our lottery in the summer and it be fine, and we'll only take seats if we feel confident that there are seats to be taken.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Not seeing any. I know I'm closing quickly, but if you do have a question, speak now. Otherwise, I think we are all set. We have one last agenda item, which is to adjourn. So, thank you, Dr. Slaughter, for joining us and staying so late. And thank you, CLO and Ms. Gripko for joining us. I will make a motion to adjourn the Regional School Committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald, second by Spitzer. Roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Seeger?
Seeger, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The Regional School Committee is adjourned. Thank
Good night,
you,
everybody.
Thank you, Amherst meeting.
Good night, everyone.